see what was changed, which isn't a huge amount, but it does have a difference, and it does reflect what I heard from you all. So you should have received an email and printed copy of the track changes, and those will. We found this a bit challenging, of course, having listened to you all and had to go away and adjust things, but that's what happens. Right, I'm going to dare to resume, and you're welcome to ask questions. I do have Councillor Newman and Turner down as questions. Are you still keen to ask a question, Councillor Newman? What about Councillor Turner and Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you.
Just check with Councillor Turner, is he keen?
Yeah, he can.
Do you want to ask a question? No, okay, right, I will just... And right, we're resuming, and the first question goes to Councillor Daniel Newman, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question, and I assume Dr. Weiss and others in the community space here, if to a implementation of a cash reserves management plan to achieve compliance with a 6-month reserves policy by the end of 2023. My question there, some bureau have reserves, but these reserves have been misunderstood by officers to date. I have bureau in my ward that are carrying reserves, but they're not just sitting as lazy money in a term deposit. They are there for a specific purpose, usually about the step change to roll out CAB services to the community in a given time. But what we have here is the implementation of a plan. I assume this will be led by officers in conjunction with ACAB. I'm just wondering about the need for this, because I think that there isn't a settled agreement as to the need to change the funding plan for CAB. We have a contract with them, and I have been frustrated to date by attempts by officers to try and get bureaus to spend up reserves and to live on reserves and to exhaust them before they get the next tranche of OPEX funding that was agreed as per that contract. So could somebody explain why we have F2A? I think that B, C and D are fine, but A is difficult.
I'm just going to ask the correct appropriate officer to come to the front and answer. That's a very detailed, specific question, and I believe Claudia is on her way. Thank you very much.
Kia ora koutou katoa, and thank you very much for the question through you, Your Worship. So the cash reserves policy, that the amendment or the proposed amendment that I can see here, perhaps the history behind this is that our teams have been working with the CABs to try to define a better cash reserves policies. The intent of that is not to put pressure on the CABs, but rather to ensure that the funding that the CABs receive on behalf of council is being used for the purposes that council gives that funding for. And some of our research and analysis has shown that some of the CABs are still holding cash reserves from pre-amalgamation. And the recommendation is, and we are very happy to work with them, but the recommendation has been that we need to work perhaps more constructively on using those funds so that the funds that have been provided by council and ratepayers can ultimately be used for the purposes that they were intended for.
I mean, that's a view, Your Worship. I frankly, yeah, we could have that discussion. I think that is a view that is contested by the Bureau and a number of us. So I mean, this is so close to, I don't want, we'll talk about a judgment about this overall, but I wonder if this particular inclusion is essential, because I think that if there's a broader discussion about Bureau funding, that needs to be considered as part of a bigger conversation, and this particular matter will be interpreted as Bureau that have those reserves for a reason, which might be something that we disagree with, will be required to use those reserves first, which is not fair, because the alternate is those bureaus don't gather those reserves, they just don't extend those services to new communities that will require it, which is often why those reserves have been built up. I don't think that's something that Dr. Weiss can answer. That's a statement from me, but thank you.
Perhaps I can help in terms of the concept around implementation plan, however, because I think the intent could here be read in terms of helping create the a cash reserves management plan. So therefore, the timing of the implementation may allow for some flex to minimise the risks, if that's what's aimed for here.
Your Worship, I wonder about the value of the work that's taking place in relation to this particular issue. I just think that this is not really, I mean, we're fighting on so many fronts around the region at the moment. I'm just not sure that this is an essential campaign to be waging in relation to these, to the bureaus. Not all of them have reserves. Some have reserves, but they have reserves for specific reasons. And if we want to basically have them spending up those reserves first, they'll do it by not extending those services to new communities. Thank you.
Okay, it's a fairly detailed part of the thing. I don't know whether the budget's going to stand and fall on that clause.
Claudia.
Councillor
Claudia.
Fletcher.
Your Worship, the reason I asked Dr. Weiss to stay is because I have my name up for questions, but it's on that particular subject. Hence, I asked her to stand by, but you're the chair, so I'll wait.
Oh, well, you can go next, actually. I'm
mine.
sure Councillor Fletcher won't mind you going ahead. So off you go.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tēnā koe, Claudia. Ngā mihi ki a koe. Claudia, what was decided because, well, first question, was there a working party put together with an equal membership of councillors and local board members and staff around the CABs?
Kia ora, and thank you for the question. And through you, Your Worship, I'm not familiar with a working party from my angle. My apologies if that may have occurred in the past, but I'm not familiar with that during my time.
Okay, if I said to you that there was a working party of equal members of the local boards and councillors, and we worked through a lot of the issues that Councillor Newman had said, would you be surprised with that?
I would probably welcome the fact that it had occurred.
Can I then suggest, Dr. Weiss, that some discussion happen with your staff around the working party, because that particular working party was achieving things, I believe, quite well, but then staff had to be released, for want of a better term. But there were some notes, and I do have some of the notes from that. Look, I just put that there as whakaaro to you, Dr. Weiss. Your Worship, I am on the same lines as Councillor Newman in regards to having a look at putting something in place similar to what had already been in place, but has since gone, around this particular discussion, in particular with CABs, but staff who have a working relationship with CABs. So I don't know whether that could be put anywhere, that a working group be formed, and that will be through Councillor Hill's committee, because it was there at the Environmental and Community Committee, I believe, but more recently the Parks, Arts, Community and Events Committee, where we were working with the CABs and our staff. So just a suggestion and just to support Councillor Newman. Kia ora.
Is there a way out of this?
Just strike it out.
Ma'am, if with your indulgence, perhaps it would satisfy the governing body if we were to change the wording simply to say to work cooperatively with the CABs to undertake a review of the cash reserves management plan.
Can I suggest?
Councillor Newman, you've kicked this ball into the back of the net.
Yeah, I'm sure you want to kick me after this, but can I suggest that that the best way forward, I think that this should just be struck out, and that what should happen is that we reconvene a political working party comprising members of the governing body and the local boards for the purpose of consideration of all matters to do with CAB funding.
Your Worship, can I just humbly suggest that if anything around the workshop, Councillor Newman, that it goes through Councillor Hills's committee, because that's where it was set up and was working really well. But that'll be something, Your Worship, to be taken through to Councillor Hills with his input.
I'm going to propose we just dump A, strike it out, and we'll have a note that Councillor Hills will put this on the agenda of his committee next time as an issue that has yet to be considered and solved. Is there a general consensus around the room that you're all happy with that? Okay, we're going to strike A, and Councillor Hills, you'll make a note that this is to go on your agenda as a problem yet to be dealt with. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for your input there, Councillor Filipina and Newman. Councillor Fletcher.
It's great to see the cooperation on that, because the contractual situation that we've had with CAB has been a really positive one, and it's good to see CAB here present in the room. But it's about unintended consequences that I want to pose a question, and it comes under the operating spending reductions, and my question is to the CEO of the unallocated savings to you, Jim, and thank you for all the support through this budget. Can you comment on how you see that playing out?
Thanks, Councillor. Look, the only comment I can make really is to say that on behalf of the Executive, I'm prepared to take on an additional $5 million expense reduction challenge in order to be able to find a way for this budget to balance. I don't have a plan for the realisation of that yet, but it's not unlike would be undertaken in any kind of corporate or business organisation where there's some residual amount of expenditure reduction for which we don't yet have a solution, and we'll have to work at that during the year to find opportunities to realise those savings. So I don't have a solution for it, but I'm certainly committed to delivering it.
Thank you for that positive way in which you've responded to that, and I guess that implies that it will be on a sort of no surprise basis to the councillors. The other thing, Jim, is just looking under E1 and the proposal that we have a working group, where would you foresee advice coming through on how council could or should exercise its power as a minority shareholder with regards the airport? For the remaining shareholding, should this be adopted today, this budget?
Well, Councillor, that would just be a matter for the political working group to determine, and we as officers would provide input for consideration by the working group, both from a treasury and a financial management point of view. The decisions made by the working group would effectively become settings that we would implement on your behalf.
in the event that the budget is passed, you wouldn't be looking to any external consultants or others to assist in that process. It would just be from work from internally and with the elected members of the working group?
Look, I can't answer that question now, councillor. I think if it was necessary and helpful for us or for the working group to seek external advice, then we should absolutely do that.
Thank you very much for that question. And Councillor Sayers is next, please.
Thank you, Worship. I just had a question around the inclusion back of the $4 million on the local board area there, the reductions in the local board funding, which is obviously a long way from the 16 million which was there in the original proposal, which you took out, acknowledging that. So the question is just, because we haven't had a chance to talk back to our local boards and get their feedback on this, obviously, but in terms of questions around that kind of that legacy funding model of how some of the local boards get a bit more hit more hardly with taking a reduction like that compared to others because of the legacy hangover from the way that things were funded for local boards through their ABS funding. So are you in a position to comment about how quickly, because this is an annual budget, a one-year budget, how quickly you plan to, would like to have that addressed in terms of gaining greater equity, so such reductions are spread more evenly, or the funding is more equitable?
I think the LTP, which is not that far away, will be where we grapple with this long overdue problem of the, in my view, an incorrect allocation model. In terms of the 4 million, that's well within what most of the local boards actually came up with. Most of them came up with some savings. Very few of them came up with anything near $16 million. But most of them did come up with some, and I thank them for that. And so you can't just not sell the other half and have no consequences. Everything has a consequence. And so I think that's what was behind that. Councillor Fooley, please.
Kia ora, thank you, Your Worship. I have a similar question along the lines of Councillor Sayers and then another question to do with the airport shares as well. I'm mindful that for my local boards, in particular Māngele Otahu local board, they were originally asked to cut 1.2 million. So that would be reduced down by 75% to 300,000, which is much better than 1.2 million, but it's still a lot for a community like mine, like Māngele Otahu, and it would still mean cuts to really important community groups that provided services during the flood response, for example. I just wonder if you had considered that. I know that around the table people said that they knew that local boards wanted to contribute, but also people said that these were services that were really, really important to us and core to council. I wonder if you wanted to comment on that, and then I've got a question to our finance team about the shares. Kia ora.
Well, it's a very consequence of not selling all the shares. If you can't have your cake and eat it, I suppose. We are well aware of that, and I have been listening carefully and trying to minimise the pressure that I put on local boards and on other community groups. But we do have to balance it some way or another, and so that's what's behind that. But I'm well of that, and the Otahu Business District, of which I'm on the committee, has benefited from some of the local board funding out there, and they will be aware of all these a little bit of a haircut here and there is a lot better than having your head chopped off. So I think that's probably where I can put that one. And would you go with your second question, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. Before I go to my second question, I'm just foreshadowing that I have put an amendment up, and I will speak to that more in the debate. Just a question then on the airport shares. Previously and throughout the documents before today, staff advised against a partial sale. So I wonder if staff might want to give their position, or has their position changed around a partial sale, and if it has, how? Kia ora.
I think that they didn't advise so much against it. They advised that this was less beneficial than a full one, but they didn't actually be against it. So you can. The Chief Financial Officer's leapt into Australia, but I don't think he advised against it. My understanding, unless I was deaf, was that he thought it did less.
That's correct. We've reduced the financial consequences of each of the options there, and from the financial investment perspective, the partial sale doesn't provide as many financial benefits as the full sale. But it's not a position for us to have an opinion on whether you should or not. We're providing the consequences of that.
To your question? Thank you, Councillor Foley. Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through our conversations of this, we've talked about if we were to sell the shares, we would lock the debt cap down to the new level. So we're going down here by half of that 1 billion, which says here it should lower our debt to income ratio to around 130 million. I did ask this in the break, but it doesn't have any lock there that keeps our new debts levels locked in. I was shown F3, the approach to the 10-year budget will involve enhanced political participation, oversight, etc. But it's far from a lock. And so I'd like to just wonder about that, so that we're sort of protecting that asset as a crossover.
I think what we've always said is we do that as an absolute essential part of the long-term plan, which is the next round of squabbles we'll enter in another month's time.
So I'm to understand that our debt-to-income ratio will stay at that 230 or thereabouts by the time we get to that decision. Is that?
Well, that's the intention.
Thank you.
Councillor Filipina.
Thank you, Your Worship. As I indicated earlier, when you first started this, Your Worship, the question I have is that have you or your staff spoken with councillors and asked that there could be incentives for them in their ward if they supported the sale of the airport shares?
There are no offers along those lines, and we have discussed all sorts of things with various people, but there are no offers particularly aimed at anything in anyone's award.
Okay, thank you. I will remember that answer. With the finance staff that are here, can I, Peter, it may be obviously to you, and I've made some notes, and please excuse me. Peter, can you tell me that the annual plan 22-23 identified a $90 million hole? Or sorry, when I say hole, that $90 million were identified to be carried through to this current annual plan?
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through you, Your Worship. You are correct in substance there, Councillor. In fact, within the 23-24 supporting information for the consultation document, we talk about that budget which was adopted in June 22 because it sets the framework for this one and the updates that have been going through. We talk about the impacts of COVID-19 that were larger and more persistent than projected, compounded by rising inflation, interest rate and supply chains. We talked about 90 to 150 million of a risk within there, and the Council mitigated the impact for 22-23 through the use of 127 million of better off funding and delays to some capital investment and some additional borrowing. There is more within that and within the annual budget, but that was the position from which we started, that operating gap of 90 to 150 for which we had remedies for the 90, and it clearly expressed the risks that attach to further inflation and interest rates increases.
Can you also confirm that as a result of information that you gave us or your team gave us, that particular 90 million then rose to 295 million based on things outside of our control, for example, labour cost inflation, contractual statutory inflation impacts around the transport asset depreciation and many other levers to get us to 295 million?
Yes, indeed, I can. That is page 3 of the supporting information for the budget that we consulted on. You've listed the waterfall diagram that goes from 90 to 205, which was the update at that point in time.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at page 9 of the material that was received by us. But also on page 15, there was from 295, we ended up going through to 325 again. Issues that were outside of our control. For example, insurance and utilities, depreciation update, interest and inflation. Can I confirm that? And then we also had 50 million at the time, but $40 million worth of, how can I put it, storm-related costs.
Yes, indeed, Councillor. Those were the updates we provided to governing body, and they're attached to item 9 as Appendix C, or updated budget projections.
And you also say that, or even confirm that one of the largest debt that we've ever had is the emergency budget that was close to 900 million.
Yes, I guess that wasn't a debt, but that was a significant challenge, 900 million, and what that was a loss of revenue over about a 4-year period. So COVID hit, and a lot of our revenue streams, virtually stopped overnight, including revenue from ports, the airport dividends stopped, public transport revenue ground to a halt. Those things are slowly recovering and coming back on stream now. But yes, that was a significant impact, 900 million of lost revenue.
And Ross, there's about 2-3 more questions I got. Can you say that emergency budget that we went through, that one there as well, wasn't as a result of anything that our staff had an input in creating?
So the primary driver of that was the impact of COVID-19 on our revenue. So obviously that was not something council had control over the circumstances.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to move now to the airport shares. Can you please tell me, Peter, or anybody else here that's either online or in here at the town hall, can you tell me how much interest, depending if this new mayoral proposal goes through, how much interest in the airport should we have to ensure that there is no foreign takeover, as what happened with Monaco City Council, who had to purchase extra shares, so then Emirates and the Canadian Pension Fund could not take over the airport? Can you tell me currently how many, or how the percentage of shares that we should hold on to, so then at least we will have some input and some say if there is a takeover?
I believe we have provided that advice before. To achieve a effective stake to stop takeovers is well above the current shareholding that we have. What we currently have is not adequate to prevent a scheme of arrangement, for instance. We've set this out in terms of control and influence within that attachment that covers the airport shares. So you would need over 25% to block special resolutions or schemes of arrangement.
Okay, so if I had any information from people within the market and said that 11% that we should hold on to, are you saying that's incorrect? I mean, I can always double check, but if that's your advice, I'm saying right. I can end up getting contrary, but that's your advice at the moment?
That is my advice at the moment.
Okay.
That's also the advice of our appointed expert, and that has been provided to you and is also in the papers today, page 144.
That's why I asked, because I needed to get clarification, Peter. As you know, I will ask questions of clarification if I don't have what I believe is the true and correct answer. Your Worship, I still have some other questions as well, but what I'll do is I'll give others an opportunity, if that's okay, Your Worship.
I'll come back to you if you like. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Just going to your F, Mayor, the new F. I note that it's agreed to consider the following. So everything that follows is to consider. It's not an absolute. It's a starter, I gather. That's probably a question for you. So look, I'm just mindful of no, I'm just going to get the right papers here. Sorry.
The meaning of that is that those will be absolutely things we consider in the 10-year budget, which is coming up shortly. And I'm quite happy to say that we will
Okay,
definitely
that's agreed
consider.
to consider the following approach. So for consultation, I'm just not aware of us workshopping, say, the group financial responsibility and transparency rules. We didn't consider that in any workshop socialisation from my memory.
Well, that's in there as a response to a number of councillors who are worried about the fact that we'll just go and borrow it all back again. And so it's one thing that I think that this organisation desperately needs, actually, is some financial responsibility and transparency rules, just like your government have.
Yeah, look, I don't...
I think there's some support for that.
Look, I'm not necessarily disagreeing. I'm just sort of trying to understand, you know, what that means, and I don't want it to exclude other things that we might consider. So
No, not at all.
Yeah, okay. So when we go to the Roman 3 under F, enhanced political participation, we're talking about the participation of all elected members there, including local board members, I gather.
The answer to that's yes, actually, and in fact I have been quite vocal in wanting to have more input and responsibility from local boards.
Okay, and then just following on that 3, it talks about and providing for independent and contestable facilitation and advice. What are we expecting there? We have had a discussion about this question of so-called independent advice, and you know, I sort of wonder how you choose independent advice. I could choose my independent advisors, and they'll give me the opinion that I want, and somebody else will choose their independent advisors, and it'll give their preferred opinion. So I'm just a little bit nervous about, I can understand contestable. Wouldn't mind some guidance from the chief executive here, actually, as to what does independent really mean? I mean, are we going to go outside of the advice we receive from this council? How would we go about choosing independent advice, Mr. Stevick?
It's a good question, Councillor, and at the risk of being lost in a philosophical debate about something that's beyond the core question of this budget, it is worth considering because you know, it'll be important from time to time for us to be able to seek external input into decision making. Equally, it'll be important from time to time for councillors to be able to seek some point of validation of the decisions that we make or the recommendations that we make. And I think we'd need to assess that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. And Mayor, thank you for including the C, so F, Roman 4, capital C, in response to something that I mentioned to you about the need to focus on the revenue opportunities that we're not tapping into at the moment. That takes me now to back to the finance group and the airport shareholding. Peter, you've heard me earlier on say in response to the Mayor's invitation to signal, you know, where we were each at, and I signalled that I was conditionally supportive of the possible disposal of a tranche of, say, $500 million of airport holdings. The Mayor's proposing $1 billion, which is double where I'm at currently. Can you just, I'm a little bit concerned about that buffer zone with the 10%. So there's a dividend coming up. We take the dividend, others take the dividend reinvestment plan, our shareholding drops, and I'm just nervous about that. The capital raising or the possible capital raising that the airport has signalled today in its announcement on the PSE4, I think it is signalled for the back end of the PSE4 period, which is 26-27. It's not anytime soon. Could you just explain how your team might approach the need to maintain the 10%? That's the first question in that area.
Just before Peter answers, Councillor, if I could offer a perspective on that, I think that they are legitimate questions and we'd want to put those to the political working group as soon as possible after the decision is made, should it be made.
Okay, so is there no answer to that now possible, though?
I think it's correct to observe that in order to maintain a shareholding of 10%, then certain decisions would need to be made in relation to dividend reinvestment plans or our participation in equity raising exercises by the airport. But we would need the approval of the appropriate committee in order to change the settings such that we could participate in that way. So that would be a decision we would need to make subsequent to the decision to adopt the budget.
Okay, I'll leave that one there. Just one final one at this stage. Peter or Jim, as I just said, the 500 million was my position, and I'm nervous about going to that 1 billion mark. If there was an increase in the debt from the Mayor's 100 to say 110 or 115 or 120, what would be the corresponding number in terms of the sell down? Would that be, would 120 be an $800 million sell down as opposed to a billion? Would that be the accurate calculation?
I think the best I can do is give you the pointers to how to make that calculation work. So if the debt was to be increased, then we'd want to offset that with interest savings on the debt. So if you were to increase debt by 10, then we'd want to reduce interest costs by 10. If interest rates were 5%, then that's a factor of 20. So 20 times your 10 or 200 million would be the other side of that equation. Yeah.
Okay, so at 110 it would be maybe a disposal of $800 million in value, and at 115 it would probably be, I think, or 120 would be 600 million disposal in that area. I think I understand that. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, we can nickel and dime around for a bit, but we've got to get where we even sell any yet. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. I have a very specific question in relation to the new table that's been emailed around to us. I'm sorry, I'm just bringing it up. On the AT cuts. And I asked this question in the workshop, and so I'm just trying to confirm that I have understood this correctly and this is still the case. So this is page 4. CCEO mitigations and cost reductions, Auckland Transport AT savings. So the original proposal was 25 million. The proposal before us now is 15 million. And there's a note there about retaining the number of PT services in the current reduced schedule. And my understanding from the discussion was that that's in the original but not in the new. So there's no longer the intention having 15 instead of a 25 cut means that we don't have to stick to the current reduced schedule. We can potentially start to go back to the previous schedule before we did the reductions. That was the discussion in the workshop. I just wanted to check that that's correct because I find that wording confusing. If someone wants to come back on that, that's fine, acknowledging that's,
I think
yeah.
the change there was partly the fact that the AT themselves found $10 million.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
And so
I'm
I
just
don't think
wanting to check. So the wording there, when it says original, retaining the number of PT services in the current, in brackets, reduced schedule, that pertains to the 25 million, but not to the 15 million. Yeah, okay, good. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to see that.
Thank you for that, Ken.
Sorry, Councillor Darby, can I just correct my answer to your question in relation to the 10% shareholding position? The policy as set out in the proposed long-term plan amendment, which was audited, explicitly does provide for the purchase of additional shares if needed to maintain the minimum 10% shareholding. So that's part of what was audited and is proposed in the long-term plan amendment.
Thank you for that, Jim. Councillor Dalton, please.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Councillor Filipaina, do you want to continue your string of questions?
Thank you, Your Worship. Peter, can you explain, is the only reason, and this may be to you, Your Worship, as well, but the only reason that the proposed sell-off with the current shares is because the consultation document said up to 10%. That's the only reason why it's 8.9? Or is that a question I should ask His Worship the Mayor?
It's up to 10. I wanted to leave 10. The 10 is very important. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's right. So then, 10%. Does that allow Auckland Council anything when it comes to the airport? And I'm not talking about we got the regulatory and consenting area that we can have an input. That 10%, is that as a result of the consultation document?
The 10% is a result of the options that Council decided to place within the consultation document, and the consultation document sets out the three options. The proposal for sell down, alternative option 1, status quo, option 2, immediate partial sell down, maintain a minimum 10%. This would enable the Council to divest around 8% of the shareholding, with the sale proceeds used to repay debt.
Sorry to interrupt, Peter. Yep, thank you. Can I confirm also that when we had the feedback from our community and people who mentioned around this table, there was quite a few, the most in any that we've had, but 59% of people either didn't want to sell any or have a partial sale. Can I confirm it was 59% total?
I'm afraid I don't have that detail in front of me, but I'm sure the councillor has added those two factors together, much like there was a majority of those who would look to sell some or all.
Thank you, Peter. I've just been corrected. It was 62. Okay, I just got corrected. Peter, can you also, in regards to the partial sale that we have in front of us, what are the options for us, depending on where this new Merrill proposal settles around this table? What options do we have in regards to suggesting people or organisations, and Councillor Kieran and Leonie actually mentioned it at a workshop, but for us, what input do we have in regards to who we would prefer to purchase them?
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through you, Your Worship. I believe we should keep any execution strategy pretty close and commercial at this stage, and there is an item in confidential following on from this if Council decides and resolves to sell some or part of the shares.
My last question, Your Worship, and everybody, I know you're yawning, so I make no apologies. But my last question is that in the documents that you presented to us, that we can borrow up to 140 million?
Yes, that was what was provided for in the consultation document. It provided some flexibility in terms of rates and some flexibility of borrowing up to 140 million as part of closing the budget gap.
And just supplementary to that, would you know the interest on that 140 million? Do you know how much interest would be on that 140 million?
Yeah, we've done a wee bit of a calculation and somewhere between 6 and 7 million. However, the key factor with the short-term use of debt is the fully funding depreciation track and the need to maintain that track, particularly in the next 4 years through to 2028. So to the extent to which we use short-term debt in the interim, and that's prudent, as we've talked to, because it is okay this year, we still have to maintain that track forward. So the use of debt is a temporary lever.
But it's 140. Thank you.
Councillor Leone, please.
Kia ora. The first question is just in relation to the local board funding. Can we please get an idea of how that, for the 4 million, is that going to be equitable cuts right across all of the local boards, taking into account population? For example, some have a lot lower than others.
So the proposals all the way through have been to use the current local board funding policy, which is a policy in the LTP. That's the agreed policy that we've got for how discretionary funds are applied across local boards. So we would use that existing funding policy to apply that 4 million.
And just a second question, can we just get an idea of how much, given the difference with the original amount we were looking at, the full amount of shares, and now we're looking at going down, so what will the cost be for selling partial for the amount that you've got there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We gave some indication of the sale percentages with the full amount and the cap that might be attached to anything over a set baseline level. It is difficult to make a call as to whether they would still be the same percentages that would apply to a partial sale. However, I would consider them to be directionally correct.
Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you, Mayor. A few questions. Just on the, and that might be for you, Mayor, on the, similar to Councillor Darby's question, if we support the approaches going towards the long-term plan, there will be some clear information and papers for us to actually make a decision around debt to revenue. This is not locking us in, it's just letting us look at it. Is that correct?
Locking us into actually considering it, but it's not locking us into what we decide when we do consider it.
So I just want to make sure, because the information we had right at the beginning of this meeting said we could be up for about $3 billion worth of debt because of Storm, CRL, etc. We would consider that as part of, like, I would hate for us to drop and then need to go back up because we need to borrow.
Well, I think, this is all responding to something that occurred before I arrived, and we've been rushing to get through this. But one of the things that concerns me is that we have a grab bag policy for debt, and we need to have it properly thought through. Where is it going? What does it probably mean? How are we going to work our way down to it? And we can't make these decisions in the absence of looking at what we know is coming over the horizon. So we need to have considerable time of the LTP needs to be devoted to an understanding and a clear policy that people really get. It's not just something we should grab at the last minute every year. It's not a good way to do it. We can't ignore things which are not in this year but are coming. We have to think about that. And so I'm absolutely determined that this becomes part of our discussion. We can't just let ourselves slowly grind in.
I was just making sure that we will have fulsome information before we make that sort of decision.
Absolutely. That's the whole point of it.
Thank you. On the targeted rates, the 2 targeted rates, I've had it confirmed to me by both departments that due to the additional budget already collected, those programs continue. But can I have a categorical, I guess, promise from you that in your proposal in discussion with us on LTP that you're looking to increase the rates back to normal to restore that long-term funding?
It's unavoidable.
Okay, so as long as, so you'll be putting that forward, right. On the airport, we've had independent advice, council advice, and also the advice from from the person that Councillor Fletcher has had speak to us a few days ago, John Crawford. So I've had a lot of feedback that we could have decision-making power over the airport without 18%. We could put a director on, we could stop future runways, we could affect the climate change policies of the airport. Could I please have and all those people told us no, that is not something we can do. Can I please have it categorically? No, I don't think people are listening to me. I'm saying that people have said we could, but the advice from those 3 different areas have told us that is impossible. Can I please have it on the record here for the people who have been advocating to me that we would never, with 18%, 10% or no percent, we would never have ability to stop a runway, advocate or get a director on the board?
Yes, that's correct. We believe and have consulted and got advice on this that the current shareholding of the shares in Auckland Airport, the council has no real ability to control or influence the strategic direction of the company.
So we are simply a financial shareholder. We could never have, we could not stop a future runway, etc., because we have 18%. I just want to...
The assessment that we provided was that there is no real influence we can have on the company. Correct.
Right, so we would need to do that through our regulatory arm and advocating as a council because it's an asset in our city. Yes. Thank you. And thank you, Mayor, for allowing Councillor Ferry and I to have another go on Cody Kids. There's a lot of nervous parents and teachers out there on this subject because we don't really understand the process going forward. So I just want to check the process. If this passes with allowing local voice, it would mean the local boards would, because in my case, on the North Shore ward, the centres are based in local board delegated buildings. So I guess my case is that you're allowing this resolution would allow the local boards to work with the council staff and the teachers and the families of Cody Kids to make sure there was a way they move forward if the local board choose to allow them to go forward. Is that what this resolution means? Just for the people who are wanting to know.
Exactly.
Thank you. And last of all, and you'll probably give me a pretty short answer on this, the reason why, my preference would be to probably add 0.4% or 2% to cover that local board funding, but is the suggestions you've had around the room that would tip us over 8% on rates to keep that in there, and that's why you've kept it.
We're doing our best to meet the promises we made to the ratepayers to keep it as much in control as we can and stop wasting money and all those things. And so somewhere you have to draw a line, and this is where we wanted to do the line. Hopefully with an LTP that works as well as what people are hoping, we might be able to restore some of that later on. But we are where we are. As both 2 councillors have said, we're starting from a place which we didn't want to be in, but we are there.
I have one last question on an amendment, but should I wait till that amendment is proposed to ask that question? Is that easier if it's proposed?
hold your question about amendments until amendments emerge. I think otherwise we're speculating on the unspeculatable at the moment, or the unknown. But Councillor Williamson, would you like to ask a question, please? And then
Actually, just a
Councillor
quick supplementary to what Councillor Hills was asking. Even if we could get a director on there, the director has to act in the best interest of the company, not in the best interest of the shareholder under the Companies Act. And so that person may not be subjected to direction from us in terms of their behaviour as a director of the company. So it would make no difference anyway.
You have to have a controlling interest in ownership.
Correct.
To do that, and any director that behaved in that manner would be ultra vires and wandering into extreme legal difficulties within themselves, no matter how much they wanted to do that. It's wishful thinking. Councillor Watson, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions on the airport shares, and it may be covered somewhere, but there's a whole swag of papers coming forward, so I'll just cut to it, and excuse me if I'm repeating stuff you've already said, but it really goes to the impact of the new proposal, roughly 44% of the shares, I think, $1 billion, give or take. What does that do to the net funding impact out in like the outer years, particularly like say out year 31, as far as that difference between interest cost savings and estimated dividends foregone? Do we have that, or has it been covered somewhere? But maybe you can just refresh my memory.
We're just tracking that down now. It is in some of the background material in the appendices. Okay. So with regard to the immediate partial sale and maintaining a minimum 10%, the option's projected to contribute 28 million towards addressing 23-24 operating funding challenge, and a net funding benefit of 131 over the remainder of the long-term plan period. With regard to FY31 explicitly, the assumptions that we have in there have an interest cost saving of 47 million, estimated dividends foregone of 35 for a net OPEX funding impact in that year of 12. That's with the reduction by around 1 billion. I do like the words around 1 billion. If we haven't already got around 1 billion, that should probably be what we put within the resolution and under debt number 8. Otherwise, it's rather too specific.
Okay, thanks for that one. That's important because that's quite different from our last presentation from Flagstaff, of course. We should be aware of that. And the other one just goes to the annual debt requirement that's forecast. So and this may be out of date even though it's March 2023, but the Auckland Council Investor update for these forthcoming years as far as our refinance debt and our new debt, but particularly our new debt, over the next couple of years then, that sees that increasing by again roughly $1 billion. Am I correct in saying that? So our new debt over the next couple of years goes up by $1 billion, and then we have refinance debt, I guess, at a higher interest rate too. This is the March 2023 was the only one I could find.
Yes, that is the last one that we gave to investors based on our December year end. Our refinancing debt fluctuates between 1 and 1.5 billion or thereabouts, with new debt being on top, and looking at the graph somewhere around 500 million or thereabouts. You'll notice that new debt decreases, as does the refinancing, quite significantly past 2028, and that's just another opportunity for me to point out how important it is to fully fund depreciation, because at that point our funding sources come more from our operating surplus than the need to take on new debt.
Yeah, it is a little hard to tell by those blocks, but I think it's probably more closer to 800 million than 500. I think just going by that.
Well, and we can provide that in table form to make it easier to read.
Yeah,
this is a presentation to investors.
Okay, so in terms of just the real figures here, about $1 billion from the airport shares, and then we have our new debt. Well, that's forecast 800 million, and refinance debt. What sort of, just out of interest, out of that 1.5 billion I think you mentioned, what's the kind of the increase in cost as a result of the interest rates on that then? Do we have that?
I would probably take you back to some of the waterfall diagrams we've produced, with the one being most valid being what we included in the supporting information for the CD. So of that, and we had a $205 million increase. Transport assets depreciation 39, higher interest costs 50. Those are some of the key elements that come through. So the interest costs, inflation impact on your build costs, they impact on depreciation, so they hit in a number of areas. But I haven't split down the capital investment aspects into that, but we are seeing quite a lot of construction cost inflation.
Okay, thanks. Just a slight change of tack here, Mr Mayor, and last question from me. It goes to this latest email out, the spending cuts. I see that we have the addition of stop funding for the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre. Seems to have suddenly made an appearance on the scene out of nowhere. Just what, I'm just curious to know how that one youth centre gets lined up for the firing squad and not other youth centres, and secondly, what, if any, contractual arrangements are there in place? I assume that there is a funding agreement of sort, but it's just curious to see that that particular youth centre, which costs less than any of the other ones, just appear there for its funding to be stopped. Can someone enlighten me?
It was the only one that was consulted on. That's how it got there, I'm told.
We on cutting the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre.
Apparently we
I
did.
recall seeing that in the consultation material.
Well, read the small print.
What page?
Who's that? Who's the thing I had?
Kia ora, and thank you for the question, and through you, Mr Mayor. So I'm not aware of the specific details regarding the proposal in this situation, but what I can tell you regarding our youth centres overall, there had been a paper that was submitted in PACE committee, I believe, during the last term that looked at youth centres overall, and the Hibiscus and Bays Youth Centre being funded as part of a LTP as a separate line item is highly unusual. So the overall funding of youth centres is typically done as part of a group and as part of a grants program, and to pull out one youth centre item such as this is very unusual, and perhaps that is why it has been put forward here.
We've only had about a decade to get it in there, but that aside, I just would appreciate a bit more detail on why that one appears now. And I am aware of the arrangement that came courtesy of the support of colleagues in the last mayor, which was much appreciated, but I just want to really drill down, and you can maybe tell me offline, Claudia, as to whether that goes to the year that's left on their contract, or if this is looking beyond that. That's what I'm unclear of at the moment. I don't have to know that immediately, but I definitely appreciate knowing that.
Happy to provide that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. That might be a bit detailed, but just in regards to the local board funding and now the $4 million cuts, for the Hauraki Gulf Islands boards, their funding is negotiated a little bit differently because of their size, but when there is a cut, I don't think the same model applies, so they're disproportionately affected with any cut. And I just want to check that, I don't know whether it's we exclude Hauraki Gulf Islands from this particular cut, or if we ensure that it's an equitable cut in relation to the size of their population. because it gets very, very difficult for them when the funding cut is using the same model that we use for all boards. Is that something that you could just ensure, please?
So I've just got an answer on that. As per the policy, it's 1% and 2% of the total budget. So we take that into account.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Walker, please.
I've got a few questions. The first question I've got just deals with the Hibiscus Coast Leisure Centre. Youth Centre, sorry, Youth Centre. A little confused. And it goes like this. Claudia, can you confirm that in respect of the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre, which is a building that is not owned by council, that youth centre pays for all of its operational costs, including building maintenance, staffing and the like, as compared to other leisure centres where in some instances the staff costs, the building costs, all the costs are met by council. So this question just goes to equitable treatment of youth centres. So can you confirm that?
So thank you for the question, and through you, Mr Mayor. So perhaps I'll start off the question in terms of the overall policy recommendation around youth centres. So the way that youth centres are normally funded is that there is an assessment of the youth centre requirement and any potential gaps in that specific area. And then based on those gaps and based on the assessed need of those communities, that's where youth centres are then funded. The assessment done by our policy team, I believe it was last year or the year before, highlighted that there were no specific market gaps in that area, and therefore there was no recommendation to put forward any individualised funding. However, we understand that this is important, and but so in this instance here, the youth centre is on a community peppercorn lease, and therefore there is a degree of subsidy that Auckland Council provides. They own the building and they have a ground lease, I understand, and then we fund them the additional operating costs as per what is being put forward in the LTP.
So just coming back to my question, putting aside the gap, because that was contested, but just looking at the issue around the expense burden that leisure centre has compared to the others, I'm just looking at confirmation that it's an anomaly, effectively, as far as the funding of other youth centres, other youth centres is concerned. It is completely different. I mean, that can just be a yes/no answer.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the reason why it is different is based on policy advice that it is not justified to be funded as part of the normal youth centre policy approach.
Okay, so I understand that. Is it equitable for that youth centre to experience what amounts to a significant cut as compared to other youth centres? And is it also the case that there has been an effort applied now across successive annual plans and years to actually have a youth centre strategy and to address this anomaly? Is that the case? And that has not happened to date?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr Mayor, the recommendation regarding a policy would probably best sit within the LTP timeframes. During the LTP, we'll have the opportunity to really look at what the community needs are and to understand how we can prioritise within our funding frameworks where these funding should be directed to. So that would be probably the time to look at any potential changes to that policy.
And is it the case that we do not have any strategy for youth centres? That's my understanding.
Thank you for the question. I'm not aware of any specific strategy. However, I would perhaps caution us regarding our strategies overall. Auckland Council has a large number of strategies, and so our recommendation would be that we are mindful about the intent of what we're trying to achieve here, and we consider that as part of the LTP.
Okay, the other question I've got, just my notes.
Perhaps
This
through the
goes to-
chair, there is one additional piece of advice I can give. I believe most youth centres are actually funded locally. This is the exception by which there might be regional funding that goes outside of the grants.
Okay, thanks, Claudia. The other question I've got just goes to a comment that was made earlier as it goes to Auckland Airport. And that comment was that they may require new equity. I think that's in the documentation. And I think the question I've got goes like this. Given that the more recent raise in equity was due to COVID and quite a substantially different circumstance than would normally exist, would it be the case, and again it might be an investment advisor that would give us this advice, that the last thing that Auckland Airport would be interested in doing would be going to the market for additional equity by way of capital raising? There's a certain value judgment in that, but that's my understanding, and it certainly concurs with some independent advice that a number of councillors received.
As I indicated this morning, through you, Your Worship, I have nothing other than what is publicly available, and that was their own comment that I read out from the NZX release, and I'll leave it there rather than make a guess at what they might do.
The other question I've got goes to expenditure savings that we might find in addition in the 23 to 24 year, and it goes like this.
Excuse me, I'll just have to stop because we have to go for an extension of time, and then you can get your finish your little question if that's all right. But I'm going to move that we go for extension till 5 o'clock, and then reassess things whether we're making sufficient progress to achieve the result today, or we might at that stage determine to either extend another hour or perhaps decide that we're not going to make it, in which case we will reconvene. But at the moment I'm moving and someone's seconding. I seconded that we extend for an hour and review it. Now back to you. All those in favour please say aye. To the contrary, carried. Carry on with your question. Sorry about interrupting you, but
the other
clock got
question
you.
that I just wanted to ask that goes to expenditure savings that could be savings that do not impact on services, and essentially it's along the lines of Ken Turner's suggestion that there is scope for productivity improvements across the organisation. So my question is it conceivable that we could and should find such savings in this next financial year, even though they don't show in the budget?
Councillor, if I could respond to that question. A proportion of the savings that we've committed to for next year are in fact savings that we anticipate being able to find within our discretion that have minimal or no impact on services. We've started to make some changes from a structural point of view in anticipation of delivering on that outcome, and we still have some stretch in our savings objective for next year to be able to achieve that. That is savings that have minimal or no impact on services. In addition, I've just agreed, subject to the agreement to this budget as currently proposed, to take on an additional $5 million of cost savings, for which I don't yet have a solution, but which we would put into the same category. That is, we would look to deliver productivity improvements and savings that have minimal or no impact on services, or to the extent that they do, we would bring those decisions back for the governing body to consider. So there is a considerable amount of cost-saving commitment already built into the budget.
And would it be possible for those productivity improvements to include the council group? So we're talking about Auckland Transport, Eki Panuku, Auckland Unlimited, Watercare, and obviously Auckland Council.
Yeah, we are considering them a group target.
And will you be bringing a paper to us around the identification of what those productivity gains might be? And can we expect something from the CCOs? And I'm sure that the Mayor has a number of suggestions, for example.
Well, Councillor, as I said, I don't currently have a solution for it. That is, it's a target that we would take on. It would be a group target. To the extent that we can deliver productivity improvements that don't require changes to services or have minimal or no impact on services, then I would expect that they should be within our discretion to deliver those things and wouldn't require a governing body decision. You would expect that of us as leaders to continue to deliver productivity improvements in any event. Without having done the work around how the challenge could be solutioned, I can't say much more than that. But as I say, to the extent that there are potential implications in terms of services or service levels, we would bring those decisions back to the governing body. But we'd have to do the work to determine how we would solution the efficiency targets that we've agreed to take on.
And the other question just goes to the investor update dated March 23 that my fellow councillor John Watson brought to your attention. So it shows a graph of the council's debt, its internal policy limit, but most importantly, the debt to total revenue. So does the downward line still hold as it goes to debt to revenue? So that is still correct?
That is correct based on the long-term plan 21 to 31 and the last published financial statements as at the end of December last year. There are, of course, some differences that have occurred within that debt area, and we'll talk to some of that today in my opening presentation. The most obvious one of those is CRL, which has that 537 million additional on top of the debt. The way in which the revenue line tracks changes a wee bit as well over time. That will all be refreshed during the next long-term plan. That's a broad answer, but generally the answer is yes.
Okay, and the other question I've got is, has there been any modelling done on what a diversified fund might look like, given the projected reductions in interest that the Reserve Bank is projecting, for example, and forecasting out the sort of returns that we were getting from the diversified fund in the past under the excellent management that we had. So what I'm looking for is any modelling around the difference between the cost of capital and the investment return and the contribution that might make to debt, to revenue, and to other things. Have we done any modelling around that?
I think the answer to that question is the modelling we've done on the return from the airport versus the interest costs of selling the share in the airport and the difference between those two. We haven't examined an investment strategy that would include us looking to get a risk-free return above our cost of interest at this point of time, given the amount of debt we currently have. So no, we haven't devoted a lot of time to that. I have looked at the 2017 report on the investment fund and some of the analysis at that time, and I note that within this mayoral proposed recommendation, there is an element in there that's looking to do that exact analysis that you've talked to.
And it's correct that we don't have an investment strategy at this point. That's correct, isn't it?
No, not entirely. The self-insurance fund has a small portion of investment policy attached to that. And as we know, having gone through ECP and governing body, that's an attempt to manage our insurance costs through some element of self-insurance.
But in terms of a member of the public accessing our information and Googling investment policy, would they find anything? No, I think not. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, given we
essentially because of the proposed airport sale, have strayed very much into long-term plan matters this year. Can someone tell me when the licences from West Haven Marina, which are due for renewal and potentially, I understand, are worth over 150 million, when will that revenue come due?
Afraid that's a level of detail we'll have to come back to you on, Councillor.
Okay, that's interesting. In terms of the, I like the pre-lunch local board approach, Mr. Mayor, not the after-lunch. But in terms of the cuts, proposed cuts for local board or renewed cuts for local board, which instead of the 16 million and then back to no cuts are now down to a 4 million cut, that strikes me as disproportionate for two reasons. When you think that the AT cuts can be set against their funding of 2.25 billion, it seems to be a disproportionate cut, given most of the other ones have not changed for the local boards. And I'm really concerned that in instituting these cuts, again, the rather delicate and proportional funding of local boards are going to be reversed and will impact adversely on Aotea Great Barrier and Waiheke Island in particular. Is there any comment on that or reassurance on that, please?
Everything has to balance. That's the answer to that one, and you don't want to do anything that provides any income so that we have to have reduced outcome. That was pitched at about the level of what most of the local boards managed to achieve in what they came back with.
There's a lot of anxiety about that, but maybe Councillor Hoy has a solution for that. Just one last question, and that on the new document, the very last thing I think it is, F4C, we're talking about a 10-year budget, 2021-31. C, opportunities to increase non-rates revenue from council activities and assets, which is kind of encouraging, but if we measure those revenue activities and from those assets against the debt as we are measuring the airport, which is a genuine productive commercial asset, couldn't it be argued that those assets aren't worth a damn anyway because they will never earn as much as the commensurate debt? Any comment on that, please?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Your Worship. I think this goes to a question around asset recycling and the type of assets we hold within our portfolio. We often talk about the $70 billion worth of assets. However, out of that, we've got current assets of 1.1 billion, property, plant and equipment of 63 billion, and investments of 4.2 billion, which includes Auckland Airport and the Ports of Auckland Limited, but also other property investments and some property held for sale. Within that, infrastructure of 43 billion and operational and restricted assets of about 20 billion, includes community facilities, office, public transport assets. So the approach to asset recycling is already embedded within the current long-term plan in this year and is somewhere in the order of 70 million per annum. This asset recycling approach that we've had around the airports is in that investment, property and strategic asset space. The other ones will also need to be treated on their merits, and we do have a program in place to bring back various aspects of that to Council so that we can take those decisions based on the category they fall into.
Just when I hear officers talking about asset recycling, because it really means privatisation, jargon for privatisation.
This is subject of a memo that was given to you on the 5th of December around our approach to asset ownership and which ones should be looked at further.
I stand by my point, thank you.
Councillor Bartley, please.
Oh, thank you. Kind of further on from Councillor Lee, picking up on your comments, Mayor, about selling underperforming assets. I wanted to know, has any analysis occurred of our assets to ascertain their performance or lack thereof?
Thank you for the question, and that's a good follow-up. Indeed, the governing body workshop on the 16th of November last year had a look at the assets other than AIAL shares that council could sell, including the assets held under the investment property portfolio. So we went through that process there. We went through a strategic assessment of the asset ownerships and the suggestion of selling of non-service assets that are performing poorly or underutilised. So that broke down those assets across the 70 billion into the categories that I just described, and talked about the levers or opportunities across those categories. So to go just one level down within that infrastructure space, there's limited opportunities, the council must own them. Within the operational and restricted, there's potential high value or alternative use, so we could consider the scope of the role, the level of investment, or the ownership type, whether to lease or own. And within that investment, activity can be provided without council involvement, so we could be considering full or partial exit and a minimum rate of return if retained. We talked about the investment in the operational and restricted, including the golf assets and Haumaru housing as well, and talked about coming back on both of those issues to council and potentially reduce council's overall investment in those spaces. So we continue to implement the asset recycling and asset sales program as agreed to in the 10-year plan, and we continue to take a multi-year implementation approach to that. Some of the assets don't meet the definition or the criteria that we had of implementable within this time frame due to some of the long-term leases and commitments that are available within them. But rest assured, we continue to look at these for opportunities bring back in front of council.
Thank you. So you said the airport shares weren't part of that process then?
The airport shares are part of this current process. They were looked at as an element within the consultation document, and as you know, there were the three options consulted on.
So how was it deduced that we sell the shares then as being an underperforming asset?
I don't believe that I've made a call on the quality or otherwise of the asset or the airport shares. What we have done is produced a financial assessment of the interest savings versus a reduction versus the dividends that come through. So given our particular circumstance as holding debt, the opportunity cost of that investment has been the key dynamic or driver of the assessment that we've put in front of you.
Oh, thank you. So that you wouldn't say that the airport shares were underperforming?
I would refer to our flag staff independent advice, which talks to them as being not undervalued at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in comparison to the golf courses, how was it that we are ending up looking at selling the shares and not golf courses?
I think I mentioned that in terms of the long-term lease aspects and the ability to implement within a short time frame, but also the process of bringing that information back to you. From memory, there's also a reassessment of the golfing strategy, and I think that was kicked off around September last year. So that also will inform those decisions in that area.
So is it fair to say that it's easier to offload the shares than it is golf courses?
There's less commitment to a long-term lease arrangement with the airport shares. They are more fungible.
Right, so it is easier. So we shortchange our future generations because it's easier.
I'm afraid I didn't say it was easier. I just explained the differences between the asset and the ability to realise value and meet the implementatable, sorry, I'm not saying that right, need a water break, and the ability to achieve that within the 1 July time frame.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I said it was easier. Thank you.
one's tradable and one's not. Righto, that brings me to the end of the questions. If there's no more, one more, and then we can go to, after that, we'll ask the staff to retire and we will have a debate.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just very quickly to clarify the earlier question in respect of the Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre. I think it's important to have it on the public record here. I think I have detected this rather general reference in the consultation document about looking at funding for youth centres, plural, to save 20 million. It doesn't still quite explain this one centre then that seems to be singled out and no other centres. And that's certainly reflected in the fact that the Hibiscus Bay's local board seem to be entirely unaware of this also, because they make no comment of it, yet they were a very strong advocate in the last term of council as well. So that really still hasn't been explained satisfactorily to me in respect of what the consequences are for this next year, and again why it would be one centre that gets zeroed in on when the reference is to plural. That seems to be inconsistent and certainly goes to notions of equity. So I'm making that point and would seek a clarification of that.
So, kia ora koutou, and through you, Mr Mayor, if I can just perhaps make a clarification just so that it's not misunderstood. Hibiscus and Baths Youth Centre is the only current regionally funded youth centre, which is why it would have been put forward onto the list as part of the youth centre proposal. So that hopefully creates some clarification for the public and for the councillors.
If I can just add to that, in the supporting information for the consultation document, it did list out a number of the items within regional services, such as climate action, Southern Initiative, and it had a line there which specifically referred to no regional funding for Hibiscus Coast Youth Centre. So it was explicit in the supporting information as part of consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Darby.
Just one last one, and it comes off the back of the question of Councillor Hills on, our rights to a director, etc., on the airport company in the past. I just want to ask. I'm very aware of a body like the Shareholders Association, which has been very effective at annual general meetings of listed companies. Sometimes they buy one share and they turn up. So just going. I know that the airport company has appeared before us on a 6-monthly basis now, as of, I think, 1 year ago, after no, it was a bit more actually. But I'm not aware of us going into an annual general meeting where you have got the opportunity to influence the company. You know that there's motions coming up at the company. I'm not aware of a report coming to us on that. So probably a question of the Chief Executive. Since ACIL was disestablished, have we had reports to give the governing body the opportunity to influence in Auckland an annual general meeting by voting on particular motions, be it auditors or setting remuneration for directors or other motions that might be already prepared? Or have we ever thought about preparing our own motions and seeking the support of other shareholders like HSBC, which has got a big chunk of shares as well? I guess I want some clarification is, have we ever sought to influence through our shareholding? That's my question. Have we ever done that in the time that we've owned well north of $1.5 billion worth of shares?
Councillor, I can only speak for the last, nearly 3 years. Certainly in the time that I've been here, beyond the 6 monthly presentations from the Auckland Airport Corporation to the governing body, I'm not aware of any other actions that we've taken to advocate or to lobby for any particular position in relation to Auckland Airport decision making.
And all of that would be without having a director. There's been the opportunity to advocate but we have not taken up that opportunity to advocate through the channels that are have been at our disposal.
Well, as a shareholder, of course, we do have the rights of a shareholder.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, we will still have that, even if we sell down to 10%. There will be no worse off in our ability to do that. I rather unwisely suggested that they might have to raise some capital, and that had an impact beyond what we expected, which shows that you can have an impact. And they stated that they would be only doing it with debt, which was interesting.
Pays to be financially literate, doesn't it?
It does. So, of course, it turns out that I was right, and they're now thinking about having a capital raise. But Councillor Filipaina has one last question before we go to the... Who does? Do you want to add something, Mr. Gudsall, to that or not?
I just looked up the Auckland Airport shareholding policy that we currently have, and it's really around maintenance of the shares and maintaining a strong relationship with directors and senior officials, monitoring the risks. Nothing really around the influence of us as a shareholder, but that is something that I think is foreshadowed, has been looked at within the long-term plan discussions.
I think the suggestion that we have a shareholding, a strategy group is probably a bit overdue. I don't have any problem with that. Councillor Filipaina, one last question, and then Councillor Hills, and we might live long enough to get through to the discussion shortly. But
thank you, Your Worship, and this is based on the partai that Councillor Darby just asked. Peter, do you know when ACIL was at Auckland Council whether they had a director on the Auckland Airport Board?
I'm needing to refer to the workshop we had when we had individuals who knew that area better than me talk to it. And they talked about the director nomination process whereby a director nominated by one of our legacy shareholders a nominee was appointed, and that nominee was also nominated by other parties that were looking at directors at the same time. And then we had the question earlier, or the observation by a councillor, that those directors have to act in the best interests of the company itself. So I do believe that there was a nominee that ended up on the board, but not necessarily because they were nominated by the Legacy Council, but because they were nominated in general for their expertise and skills from a number of areas.
And is that at the time of the ACIL at Auckland Council?
Actually, it must have been before that, because it was talked about as being a legacy council.
Yeah, so that's why the question I asked was, when ACIL was within Auckland Council, did they have a director on the Auckland board? I will explain the legacy one to you, but I just wanted to know, when ACIL was here at Auckland Council, did they have a board member or director on there?
As far as I'm aware, no. I've called a friend, and I've been informed that ACIL did not have a director to the best of our knowledge.
Thank you. I will phone a friend as well after this. But look, I just one more thing. Did you know how that Legacy Council director, and just to let you know, there were 3 that were nominated, 2 were, I believe, on the board. One was Manukau City Council, the other was Auckland Council, and the other one was Infratil, and they were put forward to the boards. And do you know how many went on?
Councillor, I believe we had this discussion in a workshop. I wouldn't like to add any information more to the expert that discussed that on the day. Okay.
I will talk to you and let you know how that went. But just to let the committee know here that, yes, there were directors put on to the board. We did not, as being pointed out by not only Councillor Williamson but also Peter, they had to act on behalf of the Auckland Airport Board, but the ability for us as a stakeholder, as a shareholder, we had the opportunity to put that through to all the others, to all the shareholders at the airport. And this is why we purchased shares to get to 10.1. That gave us the ability to do that. And as a result of the lobbying through that legacy process, there were 2 directors appointed onto the Auckland Airport Board. Now, whether we say that they could have influence in regards to them being on there, that's conjecture, but I just wanted to point that out as a councillor, and Councillor Newman and Councillor Stewart were there as well. Thank you.
I'll just clarify, they could have been nominated by us, but they have to be voted by a majority of the shareholders.
Totally agree, and Your Worship, that's exactly how we ended up getting at least 2.
So
There was a nomination.
We can still nominate even into the future with only 1 share. And so, but the actual, to become a director, you have to have a majority of the actual shareholders. And we're never a majority shareholder. But we can nominate, and we should consider that in the future. I think that's a point of the additional thing there, to have a strategy group.
Totally agree. The reason I mentioned 10.1 is because that is why we purchased extra shares. So then there wasn't an overseas takeover. Hence I mentioned Emirates, not only at our workshop and now. Hence I mentioned the Canadian Pensioner Fund, because this is why we purchased it. This is why it's important to ensure that we know how many shares that we need to ensure that there is not a foreign takeover. This is why Manukau City Council and Auckland Council banded together. That's the reason why I've mentioned it, Your Worship. Of course we can. We can nominate as many as we can, and maybe that's what we should do. But my understanding is there was, in the ACIL time, that there was a director on the board. That is why I'm going to ring a friend.
Councillor, thanks. Just a clarification around, and again, this was spoken to in one of the prior workshops. The significance of 10% as a shareholding is only that it can't be acquired on a compulsory basis. We can't be required to sell our shareholding under some sort of scheme of arrangement. Anything below 10% or materially below 10%, we would be at risk of being required to sell should there be a scheme of arrangement for the acquisition of the airport shareholding by someone else. So it has significance in that respect, but beyond that, there's no particular importance to the 10% number.
Right, so Jim, just to write a reply, my whakaaro was around Legacy Council that Peter mentioned. That was my whakaaro about why we ended up purchasing 10.1. I'm not talking about the situation now we find ourselves, but that is why we ended up doing it. I just wanted to let you know, I'm not talking about now. I'm just
Righto, we're
that's why
just
we had it.
wandering off questions. We're wandering into debate, and we haven't got that far yet. And so I still have 3 questions. One from Councillor Hills, one from Councillor Walker, and one from Councillor Lee, but they are to be questions.
Thank you, Mayor. So my understanding, in the LTP, we've had a lot of questions around why aren't we looking for other assets to sell. As far as I know, is it correct that in the LTP we've locked in 70 million a year and we're requiring staff we did that 2 years ago, we were asking them to sell 70 million a year, and as far as I remember from Ross Churnside, we only got 56 million last year because it was quite difficult to get to 70.
Through you, Your Worship, I can't quote the exact figure. We're on track for the 70 this year and expect to have the timing of it achieved, albeit with some delay. And that delay was due to COVID-related impacts, which have impacted on the value of some of the assets that we might have wanted to sell.
And the other question on golf courses, because we have had a lot of questions on that. I've asked the question, and maybe I can shortcut to what I've been told, and you could clarify. We cannot, even if we wanted to, we cannot sell the ones, all golf courses until their leases expire for one. So that's many years away. Is that correct?
That would be my broad assumption as well, unless you came to some sort of buyout arrangement.
And as far as I know, all the golf courses are under local board control, not governing body control, as a local reserve or park.
Well, I'm getting a nod that most of them are local parks or reserves.
And even if we went through the process, if we wanted to sell a park or reserve, we would A, have to have the lease expire, B, have to have the local board on board, and C, have to have the minister sign off the Reserves Act. So it could take many, many years, even if we wanted to sell. So.
Yes, I believe that's a fair characterisation, Councillor. Some of the information I provided, or that was provided by staff back in December, talked to 8 of the current golf course leases ending before 2028, but that's still obviously a few years away from here.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I'm not saying that I would sell golf courses, but I'm just the information I've had is it's a very, very long process, even if we wanted to. So that's why it can't be considered right now. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Hills. Councillor Walker, a further question.
A very quick question, and it goes to Auckland Airport, and it follows on from Councillor Alf and Chris Darby. And it goes like this: is Auckland Council and the group effectively able to enhance the performance of the Auckland Airport through a whole range of strategies and funding tools that we have? For example, the council has an economic development strategy. We have a tourism and investment, tourism and events funding to bring international attractions to Auckland. We've got transport improvements that have an impact on the airport, its employment, its freight logistics and so on. And other forms of infrastructure development, also funding for sports and stadiums. I mean, that's just a snapshot, and there are others. So I'm just wanting to establish that Auckland Council and the group have a significant propensity to assist the airport, irrespective of any shareholding, but obviously the shareholding might add to that.
Thank you, Councillor. Quite a difficult question, but I think the key differentiation for me is the degree to which Auckland Airport itself is a strategic asset versus our shareholding in the airport and what that can do by itself. Hence the assessment that's done within the consultation document and indeed the staff advice on the Merrill proposal, which suggests that the 18% does not, you don't need the 18% to ensure ownership control imperatives are met. Your examples around the influence that council can have on the city, whether that be Auckland Airport or other aspects, I think are well made.
Essentially, they go to the Auckland Airport being a strategic asset for Auckland, just as the ports is, and obviously we have an influence in that when we're interested in the success of the port.